not going to wait. All right, good morning. It's 9 o'clock. A little bit of echo in here. First, I want to thank our panelists, Dr. Kimberly Martin. She's a professor of political science at Barnard College, Columbia University. She's an executive committee member of the Columbia Harriman Institute for Russian, Eurasian, and East European Studies, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and International Institute for Strategic Studies. Mr. William Usher is a professor of practice at the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University. Following a distinguished 32-year career at the CIA, overseeing some of the agency's most consequential accounts, including the Near East, Eurasia, and East Asia. Mr. Nicholas Eftimiades. Okay. As a Pennsylvania State University professor at Homeland Security, his 35-year government career spanned the CIA, State Department, Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and the Defense Intelligence Agency. Mr. Michael Mazar is a senior political scientist with RAND. Among his many accomplishments, he has served as the Associate Dean of the National War College, Special Assistant to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and President and CEO of the Stimson Center. Thank you all for being here with us today. Today's roundtable asks a direct question. Are American adversaries already shaping the homeland environment to their strategic advantage? For decades, Americans have viewed conflict as something that happens overseas, in the language of diplomacy, economic rivalry, espionage, or military force. We assume a bright line between peace and war. Our adversaries do not. Russia and China have embraced forms of competition designed to achieve strategic advantage without crossing the threshold that triggers a conventional military response. They run persistent, layered campaigns that exploit our openness, create strategic access, shape conditions on the ground, and bank options for future coercion or disruptions. Russia's campaign across Europe shows the model in practice: sabotage, proxy actors, logistics disruption, intimidation, and deniable operations, all designed to create friction, erode public confidence in government, and impose cost while staying below the line that would trigger a traditional military response. Independent tracking confirms this trend. Incidents have risen sharply year over year, expanding beyond defense targets into energy, communications, water, and transportation infrastructure across dozens of European countries. China's approach plays out closer to home. Cyber campaigns like Volt Typhoon have prompted unprecedented public warnings that hostile actors are positioned inside our critical infrastructure, not merely to collect intelligence, but to create options for coercion or disruption in a future crisis. Beijing's establishment of overseas police stations to surveil and harass dissidents and diaspora communities is a bold, unabashed example of the same playbook executed openly on our own soil inside the United States of America. In military terms, this is phase zero, the period before open conflict. But phase zero is no longer a period of inactivity. It is a period of active competition and preparation. Increasingly, it is a period in which the homeland itself is part of the battle space. Much of what enables this is not inherently criminal. Commercial investment, logistics networks, research partners, and infrastructure proximity can all be entirely lawful today and still be positioned for activation at a time and place of our adversary's choosing. Much of it falls below the evidentiary threshold for criminal investigation, allowing it to persist unimpeded inside our own borders. This is the core challenge for policymakers. Our national security architecture was built for a world where the threat was easier to categorize and thresholds were clearer. Our institutions are practiced at investigating discrete incidents and enforcing discrete violations of law. Gray zone competition is different. Cumulative, persistent, and deliberately ambiguous. It moves across sectors, jurisdictions, and authorities. It exploits seams between agencies, it rewards patience, and it often becomes fully visible only after the conditions have already been shaped in our adversary's favor. This roundtable is not intended to predict conflict or to sensationalize emerging threats. It is intended to ask whether we are paying sufficient attention to the changing character of competition. As we recognize weak signals before they become crises, are we identifying patterns that cut across traditional organizational and jurisdictional boundaries? Are we sufficiently attentive to activities that individually look unremarkable, but collectively carry strategic significance? And most importantly, are we organized for the world as it is emerging, or still organized around the assumption of a previous era? History teaches that strategic surprise rarely happens because warning signs were absent. It happens because they were fragmented, misunderstood, or discounted across institutional seams designed for a different kind of threat. Take, for example, the lessons of Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb, which should be sobering. A motivated and creative adversary can increasingly combine AI-enabled autonomous drones, commercially available technology, covert prepositioning, and networks of witting and unwitting logistic facilitators to create disrupted attack architectures capable of producing outsized strategic effects against critical infrastructure, military installations, and symbolic targets. For the homeland, this evolution in irregular warfare is occurring at a rate that is outpacing existing authorities, policies, and our defensive frameworks. If strategic competition increasingly plays out during phase 0, then understanding that competition and ensuring our institutions are structured to detect and respond to it is not a problem for some distant future. It is a problem for today. The adversary we face is not seeking a single dramatic attack. It is pursuing a continuum of activities individually deniable or difficult to counter symmetrically that gradually and deliberately shape our environment in its favor. Our task in this room is to determine whether our institutions, our authorities, and our attention are equal to that reality, and if not, what must change. With that, I now yield to the ranking member for any remarks he would like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks for always being punctual. 9 a.m. means 9 a.m., so thank you to our witnesses for being here. Thank you to Ranking Member Himes as well for his leadership on our side on these issues. We're here to discuss a critical national security topic. This committee on a bipartisan basis has focused on this issue of gray zone activities for several years now. And in 2022, we actually mandated a national intelligence estimate examining the causes of escalation and de-escalation in gray zone competition, a question that is as alive today as it was when we asked the intelligence community to address it, just a few short years ago. Now we are looking more intently on adversary gray zone activity in the homeland. We recognize that the task we have given you is not easy. This topic covers the secrets our adversaries try hardest to keep from us, namely what they are doing here in the United States to potentially undermine our security. Nevertheless, the perspective of outside experts in a public setting is important for informing onlookers, for informing stakeholders, and of course, informing our colleagues as to what we need to do to prepare for what's about to happen this year and in the following years. Here are some questions that I wanted to hopefully hear from you about during this session. One is, a couple of years ago I visited Taiwan, and one of the things that they told me and my colleagues over and over again is, you folks need to get ready for some serious disruption of your elections, interference in your elections, activities that would, be based in part on what we're seeing here with regard to the CCP's interference in our own elections. So to that regard, because this is a midterm election year and there's so many close races, and of course the margins in the House and the Senate are razor thin, any kind of disruptive activity could have an impact if it were effective in any given race. So I want to hear about your thoughts on that particular issue. Another issue is social media. I've stopped looking at the reactions to my own social media posts because I cannot any longer tell whether they are bots that are programmed from abroad or whether they are authentic responses. I just can't tell any longer. And so I would be very curious about what you're seeing in terms of our adversaries' activities, in terms of gray zone activities on social media, and how should we be processing that and preventing again, potential consequences from that could really hurt us. The third issue that I want to hear from you about is, we spend a lot of time on this committee on AHI, anomalous health incidents, especially with the intelligence community. And obviously, this is not the place to talk about all of the information that we have on this topic, but I would be curious whether you believe or what you're seeing in terms of indicia that our adversaries may be using AHI as a gray zone activity, especially with our foreign service officers, but also people here. And then finally, Iran. We don't hear enough about Iran's gray zone activities here in the U.S. We hear a lot about China and the U.S., but I think that they are capable actors in this space, and I'd be curious about what you're seeing as well. So with that, I'll pause and yield back.
Ranking Member Himes, do you have an initial statement?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Really appreciate you holding this hearing. I'm really glad this conversation is happening in public. The threats we are discussing are real, and the American people deserve to hear about them. I wanted to be here for that reason, but also because I'm just back from London, where we met with a lot of national security officials, and to a person, they said, you worry about conflict with Russia. We're at war with Russia. In the UK, they, of course, have had direct attacks on their industrial infrastructure, on their companies, meddling with their elections, and, of course, most famously, the attempts to poison dissidents on their soil. In both the open source space and classified space, it's clear that a number of nations increasingly view the U.S. and our allies as something less than a denied area. We've watched the Russians run sabotage campaigns, not just in the UK, but across Europe. We've watched Chinese actors like Volt Typhoon burrow into the networks that run our critical infrastructure, prepositioning to collect intelligence and potentially to disrupt critical functions. This is the type of gray zone activity that we're seeing proliferate, and there's a significant concern that what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. I am not convinced that we have done nearly enough to establish deterrence in this space, and I mean that across administrations of both parties. I agree with the chairman that we need greater focus on these threats, particularly to understand whether there's more that we're missing. With that said, what we do in response can't be to undermine the freedom or openness of our society, nor should it be creating self-inflicted wounds. Not every blackout is sabotage. Not every Chinese graduate student is a spy. In fact, I'll share something we heard from the man, Dr. Isaac Schwang of MIT, who literally wrote the textbook on quantum computing, who said, we are hurting ourselves now by not welcoming the cutting-edge researchers because they may be Chinese or European. We got to be very careful about that, because if we lose our innovative edge, which we are doing right now as a result of our immigration policies, we can't fix this problem. These are hard problems, and I hope our witnesses can shed light on how we can deter adversaries and protect our nation. Do we need more resources, new authorities, and how do we balance security with being a free and democratic society? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you. You will each have 5 minutes, and as the ranking member was speaking, I was reminded that we consider removing an adversary as offensive in these areas when virtually everybody else would consider that as defensive. I certainly consider it defensive, but Dr. Martin, I'm sorry, we're starting with you, Dr. Martin. You have 5 minutes, and then we'll just move down the list. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Krishnamurti, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. Russian gray zone attacks against the West have become more intense, numerous, and varied since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Among Moscow's goals are to weaken support for Ukraine, to weaken the NATO alliance, to create chaos and raise doubts about Western government competence, and to exacerbate political polarization by trying to make particular groups in the West hate each other. Many physical attacks have been carried out by ordinary people recruited on social media who do it for the money. Some of them do not even know they are working for Russia. Some have been told they're working for Ukraine. Russia has attempted to harm the U.S. directly through cyber espionage campaigns, through social media campaigns designed to divide and confuse us, and by contaminating the training of AI chatbots on the internet. It has also probed our coastline defenses. But most of Russia's really violent and destructive attacks have been directed against Europe, including arson, cable cutting, and other sabotage and assassination. We should not be complacent about Russia's targeting of Europe with violence and mayhem for at least two reasons. First, Putin considers the US to be his main adversary. His destructive actions in Europe may be practice for future attacks against the US homeland, giving him room to escalate. Second, his destructive actions have already raised the costs and risks for US private enterprise. Russia's 2024 placement of incendiary devices on DHL airplanes in the UK and Germany were likely dry runs for flights scheduled to end in North America. Russian damage to undersea cables and GPS satellite blocking in Europe harms any US business that uses global internet communication, including finance. And the Russian drone swarming of European airports has forced airport closures and harmed the global business of US firms. This means we must cooperate with our European allies to share intelligence, lessons learned, and best practices to keep the United States safe. We also need to engage in cross-agency cooperation at home, since the complexity of these attacks often doesn't fall under the remit of a single agency. I have three specific thoughts about how we can deter and retaliate against Russian gray zone attacks. First, in late 2024, US diplomats communicated to Russia that if there were mass casualties because of Russian-directed sabotage, the US would hold Russia responsible for, quote-unquote, enabling terrorism. That message should be repeated now and explicitly extended to cover our NATO allies, to demonstrate that our concerns about Russian behavior are bipartisan and alliance-wide. Second, the individuals carrying out many attacks have been recruited over social media by Russian intelligence agencies, often through Russian-based contractors. We have in the past, and should continue in the future, to shut down the servers involved in the recruiting. We should also shut down the Russian servers linked to destructive social media and AI chatbot training campaigns. While this might be a whack-a-mole effort, with new servers sprouting up as soon as the old ones are shut down, it makes their work more costly and difficult, while sending the message that we are watching them. Third, we can broadcast to Russian citizens the truth about how Putin's war in Ukraine is harming them through financial hardship, extraordinarily high casualty rates, and Ukrainian drone strikes against Russian infrastructure. We can achieve this by restoring full funding for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Voice of America, and ensuring it continues into the future. Turning Russian public opinion against the war now could save American lives in the future by making a broader Russian war against Europe less likely. I hope my opening remarks have given us some food for thought, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, and members of the subcommittee for inviting me today. It's a privilege to talk about these issues. I come to this discussion from three different vantage points. The first, as you mentioned, I spent 32 years working at CIA, where I confronted firsthand asymmetric threats and gray zone tactics used by North Korea, by Russia, and by Iran. My current work is a professor of practice at the Bush School of Government at Texas A&M University, where I teach cybersecurity, has exposed even more the capabilities of Chinese cyber attacks. And then my other role is a senior director for intelligence at the Special Competitive Studies Project, where we focus on strategic competition, particularly over technology, with the People's Republic of China. My focus has long been on strategic competition, gray zone conflict, and the intersection of emerging technology and national security. In my view, we are already in a war before the war, and the homeland is no longer a sanctuary, it is the battle space. Our adversaries, primarily China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, have concluded that they can act below the threshold of armed conflict and yet still achieve strategic effects. We are, in a sense, under attack every day, hundreds of times every month. Those attacks don't come in the form of bombers striking our fleet in the Pacific or terrorists flying civilian airliners into public buildings. They come in the form of quiet theft of intellectual property and technology. It comes in the way of constricting our access to critical minerals and other materials needed in our supply chains. It comes through espionage and the like. For the United States and like-minded democracies, dealing with this increased pressure can be challenging because the attacks are often hidden and they're aimed at eroding our techno-economic power or at weakening public will, but are not always kinetic attacks. Nevertheless, these campaigns reflect a coordinated and continuous effort by Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran and Pyongyang that are effective because the response that we provide remains fragmented and reactive. Adversary activities span cyber intrusions, infrastructure sabotage, economic coercion, supply chain leverage, cognitive warfare, and influence operations. These are all distinct fronts that reinforce one another, so a gain in one axis creates vulnerabilities in another. Much of this is deliberately lawful but hostile, calibrated to stay below the threshold that would trigger a unified American response. The warning indicators often are present, but what is missing is the integration needed to see these efforts as an integrated campaign rather than isolated incidents. Winning the gray war means shifting our attitude, our posture, from one that is largely reactive to one that is more proactive. And in my view, that rests on 4 key moves. The first, as this subcommittee is doing today, is increase public awareness of gray zone threats. In addition, we need to sharpen intelligence, both collection and analysis, on gray zone threats, deepen the information sharing that our intelligence community and national security enterprise engages with friends and allies, but expand those sets of partners. We should emphasize exchanges through AUKUS and Quad, for example. And we need to inform leaders in our country at every level so that at federal, state, and local levels, communities can act to protect themselves. And we need to do a better job of declassifying information that the intelligence community collects on gray zone threats and attribute them directly when we see it in real time. The second move is we need to build resilience. We need to stop assuming that we can deter or stop gray zone attacks before they reach our shores. Instead, we must act on the premise that they are already inside the wire. Finally, we need to impose costs on those who are taking these actions against us. We need to flip the risk-gain calculation in their minds so that Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran pay a price when they violate our laws or attack us even in a gray zone manner. I look forward to your questions.
Mr. Mazzari.
Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Krishnamurthy, members of the subcommittee, it's an honor to be here today to discuss an issue of such pressing importance. Threats to the U.S. homeland are rising sharply, and our national responses have not kept pace. Studies on Russian, Chinese, Iranian, and North Korean strategic concepts make clear that all 4 actors, especially Russia and China, view rival societies as a critical target in peace and war. Yet the rise of these dangers is outpacing our investments in resilience. The public summary of a 2024 national intelligence estimate directed by this subcommittee warned that the world will see more frequent gray zone actions, including many aimed at the U.S. homeland.
Can you hold on just 1 second? I think the Chinese are messing with your microphone.
Yeah.
Can we? Yeah. Thank you. Perfect.
Thank you. The public summary of the 2024 NIE mandated here warned that we would see more frequent, diverse, and damaging acts of coercion and subversion in the gray zone, including many aimed at the U.S. homeland. Since then, the dangers to the United States have only expanded. Some of the reasons have to do with the capabilities demonstrated by U.S. rivals. Some are trends in advanced societies that create new vulnerabilities. They create Chinese cyber campaigns, such as Volt Typhoon that you've mentioned, Russian sabotage operations in Europe, reports of drone incursions near airports in Europe and U.S. military bases, the rise of artificial intelligence models, which could put dangerous new capabilities into many hands and mean that the future of gray zone operations and the threat to the U.S. homeland will be very different than the past. the corruption of the public information environment, and the growing dependence on deeply integrated and highly vulnerable digital networks. Together, these trends illustrate the potential for aggressors to combine many attack vectors into coordinated campaigns, what we called in 2019 a new era of virtual societal warfare. In peacetime, U.S. rivals can deploy these attacks gradually to sap U.S. economic and technological strength and undermine the coherence of our society through 1,000 small cuts. But in crisis or war, such techniques could be employed to undermine the U.S. ability to project military power. During a crisis, over social media and via deepfake video and audio, aggressors will seek to muddy the origins of a conflict to create a window of uncertainty in which we might hesitate to respond. The aggressor could launch ransomware attacks on U.S. municipalities, dislocating the delivery of public services. It could disrupt U.S. military units as they move to deploy, in part by attacking critical infrastructure targets like power, water, and transportation systems. But in an era of more individualized virtual societal warfare and agentic AI capable of running thousands of simultaneous attacks, an aggressor could also increasingly personalize its campaign. It could empty the bank accounts of service members and their families, issue fake warrants for the arrest of their children, and hijack the Internet of Things in their homes. A homeland attack that derailed our response to one major aggression would seriously degrade the credibility of all U.S. military commitments abroad. A national security strategy that prioritizes the homeland would seek greater resilience against a range of hostile actions, investing in cyber and chemical and biological defense, information warfare tools, and counter-drone systems. But it would also call for major investments in crucial and aging infrastructure networks, and it demands a new institutional structure or process. The job of homeland resilience and event response is still spread across a kaleidoscope of departments and agencies. Finally, a collective response in which allies and partners work together to build resilience and raise the costs of homeland attacks will be far more effective than acting alone. Global power projection has anchored U.S. defense planning for 70 years, and it remains vital. But in the 21st century threat landscape, the resilience of the homeland is now the foundation of any effective national security strategy.
Nicholas. Flip it over, see where it's made.
I'm afraid to look.
There you go. You got it.
Okay, showtime. Sorry, Chairman Scott, thank you very much for the opportunity. Members, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak this morning. You know, 30 years ago, I authored my first book on Chinese intelligence operations. It was a scholarly work, and I wound up testifying 4 times before committees in Congress. And I tried to lead the members at that time with an understanding of what was coming. In fact, I said to them, if you don't do something about this problem now, in 20 years you're going to be calling me back saying, my God, how did it get this bad? Well, it's been 30 years, and it is that bad. China routinely conducts economic espionage, transnational repression, and covert and cyber operations against the U.S. They penetrate our critical infrastructure, threaten U.S. citizens, and wage a campaign of unrestricted warfare, and that's what they call it, against the United States. The CCP does this globally. It does it at an unprecedented global scale, and it employs what we call a whole-of-society approach in an effort to realize what Xi Jinping defines as the China dream, which is, and I'll quote him, to China to reascend to its proper place at the top of the world. Okay, so that's what you're facing. We've seen the cyber campaigns that they've moved forth with: Volt Typhoon, Flax Typhoon, Brickstorm, Salt Typhoon, against communications, and a number of advanced persistent threats, APTs, penetrating, actually U.S. political circles are a very, very keen focus for them. We've seen China using artificial intelligence. We've seen it using it in intelligence operations. We've seen them using it now, just starting in propaganda globally. Because we have issues like 85% of U.S. critical infrastructure being in the hands of private industry, we face as a nation extraordinary challenges. Sectors that we've seen under threat are communications, our energy grill, our transportation and logistics. Gosh, even the Transportation Security Administration put out a notice that the highway signs were all penetrated, had backdoors built into them, for China. So by China. So, it is our healthcare sector as well, equally vulnerable. In fact, the estimates suggest that 85% of biometric data of personally identifiable information on 85% of the American public is held by the Chinese. So to say that they're within, the wire and is just an understatement of the year. They have fully penetrated most aspects of American society, and that doesn't even get into things like the space sector, which is extremely vulnerable. For China, this is about control, and it appears many times in their doctrine, and their effort is nonviolence, actually. Their effort is, we seek to control adversaries, and this is their elected way of doing it. We see that, unfortunately for us, the U.S. response to this has been largely defensive. China penetrates us with cyber attacks, and we build bigger cyber walls. And that's great, but it costs consumers to do that, and it costs taxpayers to do that. So the response should not be a defensive one. We need to instill deterrence. This nation, it costs China nothing to do these cyber attacks. The cost-benefit analysis is in their favor. It costs them virtually nothing to do these cyber attacks, but it costs us a lot. We create an entire industry to protect against it. So we need to change the paradigm. You ask whether we're paying attention. Well, I've trained over 1,000 U.S. counterintelligence agents at this point, and we are sorely lacking in virtually every aspect of our response to China. So I'll just leave you with two thoughts. Number one, if the nation does nothing else, we have to have some type of integrated strategy on how we are to respond. What is your vision for where we should be in our relationship with China in 10 years? What's an integrated strategy look like? What are the milestones we need to get there? That's got to be on the bureaucracy. And lastly, we have to address the issue of lack of expertise within our own intelligence community. We're still painfully low on our China expertise, and that needs to be addressed. Thank you very much.
We will now go to member questions. Each member will have 5 minutes. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. I'm going to just go straight down the line. Dr. Martin, with you first. As we look at Europe's lessons learned, the ranking member mentioned this. At what point does a collection of below-the-threshold activities become strategically significant enough that policymakers should treat the homeland as a similarly contested operating environment rather than a series of disconnected incidents? What deterrence measures are working against Russia?
Thank you for that question. It's a complicated one to answer. There's no question that crossing the threshold into violence would be one that had strategic significance. But I think that part of the problem with addressing these issues is that the same actors who are impelling people to take these actions in Europe on the internet are doing multiple things simultaneously. So for example, there is a group called No Name 05716 that is associated with a particular Russian diplomat whose name is Yevgeny Lukshin. The BBC has identified him. He managed to convince somebody both to carry out arson attacks against what Prime Minister Starmer's properties were, to engage in anti-Islamic graffiti painting, to also try to start on the internet support for jihad. So all of these things are happening simultaneously coming from one person. And that is why I think one of the things that could be very effective in anticipating that things could get stronger would be to go after particular servers and particular individuals when we have this information. There are think tanks and there are journalistic sources that have certainly identified who these people are. I think another thing we have to be very concerned about are the presence of a number of Russian intelligence officers in both Mexico and Cuba, because we know that much of what has happened in Europe has happened across the border. And usually when we think about these officers at a public level in the press, it's presented as an espionage threat. But I think we should also think about it being a possible sabotage threat, because that is one of the ways that these things could work. In terms of when things less than violent become strategic, I think they're already strategic. I think it's just difficult to have agency support across agencies to work together on this. I think that we have been harmed by our polarization and our lack of bipartisan support for recognizing the Russian threat. I think that the sooner that we can act together at a cross-agency level to recognize that this is possible preparation for warfare, I think the better off that we will be. And I don't think that answers your question completely, but I hope it is a start.
Thank you. And Mr. Usher, you mentioned declassification and attribution. That's one of the things that I don't think we do very well. I don't think we do it fast enough. I think we're very protective of classification, and I do think that we need to declassify and make sure the American citizens know what's being done to them and who's being done, so that when they walk into a store, they can choose who they're buying things from. We're aware that China is targeting us at a whole society level, and that activity is escalating, not abating. I want you to drill down a little bit on the emerging and critical technology development from your vantage point. Which emerging technology sectors should be considered a high-value target for our adversaries? Describe the attack surface, and are we sufficiently considering how to harden that sector today? And I would point out to you, since you're at Texas A&M, a lot of this is occurring in the ag sector. And if you want to control the world, control the supply of food.
That's absolutely right, sir. So focusing on critical and emerging technologies, I would really focus on 4 areas. The first is critical infrastructure, and that's an expanding space, and a lot of it is owned by our private sectors. Like 85% of our critical infrastructure, as the committee knows, is controlled, owned by the private sector, not by federal state authorities. And with the advent of generative AI just a couple years ago now, our AI tech stack is increasingly vulnerable, as we saw in the Iran war, where Iran attacked with drones data centers in UAE and Bahrain. Those sorts of attacks could occur here easily in the United States by another creative adversary. And the AI stack includes your traditional cyber threats, counterintelligence threats, and adversarial AI, where their AIs are actually trying to poison our data sets and pollute our AI activities. So that's one. The other is the talent base. I take the point that we need to remain an open society, attracting the best minds from around the world. But the reality is that there have been some of those that have studied and worked here that are acting on behalf of Beijing or foreign adversaries. So I think some sort of additional vetting and scrutiny of what technologies or know-how they're extracting back to home countries is important. The third area is the supply chain issue. The Chinese demonstrated to great effect over the last 12 months their ability to put the hurt on our economy in a trade war with putting a vice grip on all sorts of critical minerals that are needed for our semiconductor industry and others. We need to build our own sources of domestic supply, friendshore what we can, and take other creative approaches to reduce our dependence. And then, as some of my fellow panelists mentioned, is the information space. The Chinese, as early as 1999, identified the cognitive domain as a legitimate area for contestation with the United States. They're using AI and social media to dominate that sector, and we need to develop our defenses to detect things when they occur and strike back when we can.
Thank you. I'm over time. I'll tend to be a little liberal at the time, since we did have a conflict with a lot of members at a September 11th memorial. as you mentioned social media, I would just tell you, I go to Africa on a regular basis. What the Russians have done with social media on that continent has led to tremendous turmoil. In Mali specifically, Wagner Group killed a village of people. This is open source at this stage. And then French ISR picked it up, and before the French could share it with the Malian authorities, the Russians had convinced the Malian people that it was the French that did it. And what the Russians and the Chinese have been able to do on that continent with social media, controlling social media is amazing. With that, I yield 5 minutes or so to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I knew you were liberal about something, so I'm glad it's time in this case. Look, hey, I have a bunch of questions, and I'm going to probably try to do a speed round here, but okay, Ukraine. What do we think is an example of Russian gray zone efforts in Ukraine, and the best example of the Ukrainians responding in a way that the gray zone effort in that case stopped? Mr. Mizar.
I think one great example of that is in the cyber realm. Russian cyber in the Ukraine war is sometimes talked about as the dog that didn't bark. We expected more from it, and part of the reason we didn't see more was because of a determined immediate Ukrainian response supported by many U.S. information security companies that rallied to the defense of Ukraine and did sort of a significant comprehensive effort to counteract potential Russian cyber activities.
To kind of out it, like this is bogus, this is Russian.
To out it, I mean, there's the social media piece and sort of the disinformation piece, and then there's the direct cyber attack piece.
Right.
And so it's outing it, and it's also actually building defenses and counteracting Russian cyber activity.
And was there government coordination on the part of the Ukrainian government in this regard?
So yes, I mean, absolutely early on, and other allied governments to try to help them to respond. So I think there are lessons to be learned there about what an urgent and more determined kind of cyber defense effort might look like.
So do you think it makes sense for us in the U.S. to potentially have a governmental body that would help to coordinate kind of the similar counter activity that you said that the Ukrainian government did?
Of course, we've got offices in our government that are, from Cybercom and others that are focused on this issue. That coordination issue remains and is going to remain sort of a perpetual challenge for us to overcome. And there's a range of different ways you can approach that.
Because just a couple of years ago, I remember there was some legislation, I believe, to kind of create that type of apparatus in the government, and then people were very concerned that this would become like the Ministry of Information and would start to censor people's.
It inevitably strays into politically sensitive areas, because if you're talking about trying to identify people online who are putting out illegitimate messages trying to achieve certain purposes, distinguishing those from legitimate messages is tricky. I think from a more pure cyber defense standpoint, there is work to be done to get better coordination among elements of the U.S. government, particularly in defending the tech sector and the AI sector, that wouldn't require sort of new legislation so I think stronger coordination is a generally agreed, next step that could improve our batting average.
Got it. Mr. Usher, let me ask you a question. Like, obviously, we can see the boogeyman and gray zone efforts and anything that is bad that happens to the American people. I mean, someone said, well, are the Russians behind the dead ducks and the reflecting pool? Probably not. But how about looking at what's happening with the Strait of Hormuz and the control of the Strait of Hormuz? The recent MOU, to me, suggests that now we are basically sanctifying officially the Iranians' control of the Strait of Hormuz, and I could see them using that in ways to try to coerce us to do other things in the future, based on the control of energy flowing through that strait. And by the way, I'm worried about that setting a precedent in straits throughout the world. But how do you folks, Dr. Martin, I saw you nodding your head, and Mr. Usher, how do you see that particular issue? Because while the Chinese have constricted our supply of critical minerals, I'm concerned about others constricting our supply of energy including the Iranians?
So what's interesting about the Iranian threat is it's gotten more sophisticated in just recent years. Their support to proxies such as Hamas or Hezbollah is well known. The use of terrorism is well understood. What they've developed in recent years is a more sophisticated information campaign and information game. And we saw this at work during the Iran war, where they were putting online memes and short videos using Legos, cartoons, and other motifs from.
Especially in the bombing, when the bombing
Correct.
of that school happened.
Correct. And it was, it was humorous, wrong, and clearly misinformation, but rather sophisticated in production and timing. And that shows a level of sophistication that we hadn't seen previously from the Iranians. They used to be a little bit more ham-handed when they did these things to Israel. And now in the cyber realm, they're also much more active. And just real quick, they for a long time have conducted operations in the United States, including in this city, targeting U.S. citizens and U.S. legal residents. So put those together and they pose a significant threat.
Can I just get Dr. Martin's response, since you're so liberal?
I would just remind us all that Russia and Iran have a security agreement that includes intelligence sharing across agencies. We saw that probably play out in some of the targeting that Iran did during the war against the United States. But also we know that in Europe, Iran has a support base in Sweden, and there's some evidence that Iran and Russia are sort of dividing up some of their social media and other internet-based activities in Europe so that Russia has a support player in Iran.
Thank you.
Mr. Perry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panelists for being here. I'm going to go to Mr. F. Demides, is that right? Go Penn State. Yeah, appreciate you. I appreciate your comments, and I feel like I'm kind of akin to some of your, or maybe all of you, I don't know, many of your suppositions, but you're saying our responses should not be defensive. So tell me what tell me what offense looks like, because offense isn't a response, right? Or I guess, generally speaking.
Actually, it's an issue of deterrence. So next time we find, we're looking at the greatest transfer of wealth in history, right, to China through economic espionage, much of that done through cyber. So next time that happens, kick one of their state-owned enterprises off the U.S. stock exchange, particularly one that's making ICBMs or spacecraft. Starve them of capital. That's what they care about. They don't care if you rant and rave, and they don't care if we publicize who's doing it. Starve them of capital. 40% of China's GDP is government investment into their economy. You start starving them of capital, and they're going to listen. Next time they do something, put a carrier, sail it through the Taiwan Straits. Do it again. It gets worse for you. You have to implement deterrence against things that affect them, particularly affect CCP and Xi Jinping.
So on that note, especially on the financial note, I've been frustrated since in my whole time in Congress and probably before, that you're saying when they do something, kick somebody off the stock exchange, but I want to kick them all off now. Why would we wait till they do something? I don't understand why we help our adversary who says that we don't say that they're our enemy, but they say that we're their enemy. Why we allow them unfettered access, and as a matter of fact, we allow them special privileges on our stock exchanges. Why would we do that?
Yeah, well, if you're asking me to explain the fallacy of U.S. policy, I have no answers for you, sir. But the simple reality is that we've enabled and are supporting the very same people who are pointing nukes at us, which to me doesn't make any sense. But, it's easy. Get a smart group of people together and say, okay, what things does the CCP care about? What things do individuals care about? Scholars, for example. You steal technology, you get put on a no-fly list. That's it. Easy. Coordinate this with our allies. Coordinate money going, to China with our allies, investment there, and it will help reduce a lot their incentives for their offensive actions, which are pervasive. Right now, we're just sitting back as we're the kid in the schoolyard who gets bullied and just kind of balls up in the corner, doesn't do anything.
Talk about the lack of expertise on our side. Can you be specific?
Yeah, I can. In my day in the intelligence community, we had thousands trained up in Russia. I mean, we had the Garmisch Center in Germany, right, training NATO in graduate work in Russian studies. When I grew up in the intelligence community, there were probably a dozen, maybe two dozen of us, and that you would really call experts. And now that China's become an issue, there's a flood of people coming in, which is great. I mean, there's a lot of one-book wonders. But people are trying to get into that area. But language, cultural knowledge, and awareness is really low, not only in the intelligence community, but in the military as a whole, in the defense establishment as a whole, and almost non-existent in DHS.
Okay.
So that's where we are. It's going to take time to build that, going to take better coordination with academic institutions and with think tanks to leverage that expertise and knowledge base, but we're going to have to put a concerted effort on doing that.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Martin, I just want to maybe comment, maybe get, if there's some time, your response to it. I tend to agree with you about the lack of use or the ineffective use of things like Radio Free Europe or the Voice of America, but also the lack of bipartisanship and so on and so forth. But I will tell you that I have had a front row seat to some of this stuff. And when you have the U.S. AGM not literally hiring our adversaries and literally the United States taxpayer paying for messages that were antithetical to the United States and positive towards our adversaries. And literally when you had the script flipped, and I'm going to try and be as kind as I can to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, this whole Russia collusion thing. I watched that happen in real time. I said to the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, are we not going to say something about this farce, this ruse? And he said, everybody knows that the Republican Party, and I don't mean to be partisan here, but these are facts for facts, is not in bed with the communist Chinese or the communist Russians, right? And I said, but they're not going to know that after 6 or 8 months of this constant rhetoric, this constant messaging. And lo and behold, here we are, and you got Russia, you got China, you got our adversaries working on social media against us, and we haven't done a damn thing really because it's political, it's uncomfortable. We haven't done much on a bipartisan basis to say some of this stuff was really bad for the United States of America. We get that, there are partisan battles here, and each side wants to win, and you'll go to almost any ends to win, which is something in of itself. But this has been really damaging to national security and the social fabric of our country, and I think have almost done nothing to address the reality of that situation. And every time that we have tried to, I'm going to speak specifically about the Voice of America and USAGM, that too, cleaning that mess up has become political, and it should not be. Your comment.
The most important thing that Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and Voice of America do is actually reporting about events that happen in the region to the region. And one example that we have of how that can work effectively on behalf of U.S. interests is an individual named Christo Grozev, who grew up in Bulgaria, listening to Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, talking about the terrible things that Russia was doing in various places in the world. And he's become one of the top investigators of Russia events today. So I understand that when we have a free press, various things get reported that we don't have control over. But I think Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and the Voice of America do a very good job, or have done a very good job, of having local reporters in the region talk about local events to locals in their own language. And I think that's something that needs to be assured and restored to its full level. So I'll stop there.
Ranking Member Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a philosophical question, but since my colleague made the rather partisan point about the Russia hoax, I'll just remind everybody that the Mueller investigation was actually constituted and established by a Republican Senator, Jeff Sessions, acting as a Republican Attorney General in the first Trump administration in an effort to kind of make sure this stuff doesn't get misstated and overly partisan. But my question is, I guess for the panel, I feel a little schizophrenic when I think about gray zone stuff, right? Because the arson attack in Layton, or the Novichok use, or implants being put into dam control technology just enrages me. And you heard me say in my opening statement, we need to establish deterrence. On the other hand, there's a whole category of things which this room knows better than most, of espionage, spy versus spy stuff, right? We've been doing it for thousands of years, and it turns out that the $90 billion that we spend on our intelligence community, we're kind of interested in collecting too, and implanting stuff in networks and doing all that stuff. And that, obviously, without taking away anything from the need to do counterintelligence, I just think about that differently, mainly because we do it too. So my philosophical question is this one. Where's the line? In other words, where should the hawk in me come out and say we need to do a lot more to deter around a latent arson attack? But you know what? If the Chinese actually steal a secret, well, shame on us, but turns out we're doing similar things. So help me understand that schizophrenia and where that line exists.
So I'll start with that. I think it's a great question.
We do this in, I just overheard Mr. Perry, we do this in war, right? There's a category of things that are just war and legal war, determined by the Geneva Conventions. And then there are war crimes. So we do this with war, right? We say...
We do, although that line obviously tends to shift during wars, right? I mean, it gets blurred. But I think your question goes to exactly the central dilemma of dealing with gray zone things. We want to deter as much as we can, but the whole concept of the gray zone is designed to slide under potential deterrent threats in a variety of ways, partly because there are certain categories of activity that we engage in too, partly because they use proxies and cutouts that make it difficult to establish accountability for the actions they're doing, partly because the stuff they're doing is serious and significant, but not at a level that would cause us to begin escalating to undermine the overall relationship. So I think partly the answer to your question is there is a spectrum of activities you can identify, and you can begin to carve out certain kinds of things and specify more specific responses. Sabotage would clearly, to me, fall into that category. So we haven't seen as much of that in the United States. Certainly Europe has seen more, but there are categories like that. Sabotage, assassination, actual violent activities that you can begin to message that they will cause very specific responses on your end. I think part of the challenge, we laid this out in a study a few years ago, is there's a whole category of stuff you're just going to have to compete with because you're not really going to deter it. There's some very high-end stuff that you can deter, and then you build resilience in the middle. And I think if you do all of those things really diligently, you can put together an overall campaign that leaves you a lot safer. But the stuff you're going to be able to formally deter is a handful of things, I think.
I'd like to get some more perspectives, and I'm just sort of thinking this through in real time. In the laws of armed conflict, and I get all laws are fuzzy at some point, but we draw a distinction between military targets and civilian targets. Is there any analogy there? In other words, if, we'd love to steal their 5th generation fighter jet plans, they'd like to get our F-35. Okay, that's espionage. But when you risk or damage civilians, a dam, is there a parallel line there in the gray zone?
Well, if I can jump in on that, just to address your question directly, the type of espionage that China conducts and what we or other Western nations do are dramatically different. I mean, they employ a whole of society approach. So for them, Procter & Gamble is a fair target. We tend not to steal others' technology and steal the wealth, which results in losses of millions of jobs. That's where they cut their teeth, so to speak. That's their primary effort. So the theft of technology, the theft of intellectual property, all stuff that China does that I would call out of bounds. That's more criminal activities. What they call within unrestricted warfare, drug warfare, using fentanyl precursors as a bargaining chip for the United States, I would call that out of bounds as well. counterfeit warfare. Counterfeiting is 3 times the global drug trade, and yet China does it quite knowingly and willingly, and sending it 87% of counterfeits coming to the United States come from China. So I would call that out of bounds as well. I mean, and depends if you know how you want to win this or not. Those are out of bounds. I would call them on that. Your point about critical infrastructure is well taken. We do the same thing in penetrating their critical infrastructure. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't issue deterrence, right? So I think we have to separate and look exactly at areas that we're talking about.
I'm out of time, but any other thoughts?
I was just going to say quickly, sir, that we have issued a critical infrastructure threat of the kind you're talking about, and so the distinction you see with the Chinese activities is they position themselves in networks. They don't actually take actions that harm, that kill Americans, harm Americans, that do destructive. So that level of deterrence is working, and it's an example of something you could sort of put across other aspects of harm to American citizens.
I think this is important because, the Geneva Conventions, though they are honored in their breach as much as they are otherwise, it was a huge advancement when the world said, you're not going to execute civilians. People break that rule. But that's a huge advancement. It feels to me like in this area, we ought to be able to say, there's a difference between espionage, which we do, and attacking civilians or placing civilians at risk, which nobody should do. Anyway, I'm totally out of time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I'd love to continue to pursue that line of thought.
Espionage versus sabotage, I guess, is what.
Maybe, yeah.
Before I go to Ms. Tenney, I do want the members to know I do intend to allow a second round of questioning, assuming the panelists have time. Ms. Tenney, you're recognized.
I can't tell if this is on. I can't talk today. I apologize. Anyway, I want to thank the panel. I want to go back to Mr. Eftimides. We're talking about, I appreciate Mr. Himes talking about theoretical stuff, but we're talking about them invading. The Chinese are coming in. We're talking about U.S. farmland being purchased near military bases. This isn't just, this isn't by accident. This is aggressive. Costco shipping, I was just in Crete, and the U.S. ambassador said, this is basically owned by China. This is China running the stock. The secret police stations that are all over, we're finding them. Huawei, the U.S. ambassador Morocco just said to us, let's encourage our allies around the world to use the American way, even as long as it's not Huawei, and every method that they can to intervene in our society. I think about every time I go on Amazon or any social media platform, they're selling something to you, and I'd love to ask you, can't we just simply stop this from happening? Can't we just, we are doing it in some cases, but I think they're aggressive and I think we're passive. I agree with you. Can you just maybe highlight some of those things I talked about? Shutting down the police stations, telling our allies Costco shipping can't be operating, right next to our naval base in Crete or things like that.
Right. I could take the 2 hours and I highlight all these things to you. In the case of cranes, shipping cranes, that we have at ports that were reporting out all that they had shipped and moved to Chinese ships, commercial ships as they were inbound, coming in before they got into U.S. ports. So we've seen extraction of data that way. Huawei, the 5G issue in Huawei, which I was a part of in some sense briefing for the State Department globally. So the issues get down to really understanding some of the technology that's in that case involved. There was a place, a U.S. company in Indiana, and one engineer there figured out that just the milliseconds that it took from a signal from Wall Street to get to them, to get to him was costing his company hundreds of dollars in the milliseconds because the AI, was slower than in arranging stock trades. So when Huawei's in place and has the ability to shut or stop, things for milliseconds at a time, that allows them to capture the stock market theoretically, those types of things that happen. So this is in depth and it's wide scale in every aspect. And as I say, getting a strategy behind this, and I don't think the problem is with communications with the U.S. government. We've corrected a fair amount since 9/11, and the kids that are in now were a lot different from my day, in their ability to share and work with each other. There are always going to be coordination issues. But that's not the issue. The FBI is doing what the FBI does. DHS is doing what DHS does. Nobody's sitting on top coordinating these activities. Nobody's taking, the U.S. Department of Commerce and saying, well, let's not do this, let's do that, and present a unified front. That's what we're lacking here. That's what we need to do.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments. It just seems to me that this is not, we shouldn't be talking about fairness in theory when we're dealing with China, because they're not. They don't care. They want power. Some of you, I've read some of your things, and I don't understand. I think that's something that should be so bipartisan to protect us and protect our citizens. But again, our citizens are fighting back. We don't want to we want TikTok. We're running our businesses off TikTok, but they have no idea that they're under surveillance by TikTok and all these other companies. And just even the consumerism, when you were talking about this shift, the economic shift, everything. I go through the store just trying to find something that's not made in China. I don't. It's just almost impossible, whether it's a light bulb or any product. And I think that we have to have a more coordinated bipartisan effort, and starting with the intelligence side, which is what we're doing. But thank you so much, all of you. Unfortunately, my voice is killing me today, so I appreciate the insight. Thank you.
I want to go to second round of questions, and Mr. Afmani, I want to come to you. You're talking about the inroads the PRC has made in every facet of American life, leveraging the tactics and techniques. In your view, is the U.S. approaching these gray zone activities primarily as criminal, regulatory, or intelligence issues rather than as a coordinated gray zone campaign? And if so, what strategic risks do we incur by this approach? And I also want to mention, with regard to China, and I go to Africa on a regular basis, Togo is a port that was built with money from the World Bank. My understanding is that the World Bank contributed to this for the people of Togo. And I just looked this up because I was told when I was over there that the Chinese are the ones that actually now own 49% of the port and operate the port. And so, and I guess it is MSC, or Loam Container Terminal, which is a part of China Merchants Port Holdings. And so if you could include kind of in that how China steps in and takes advantage of what the world is trying to do for other countries that are actually in desperate need of organizations like the World Bank.
Sure. So we have two different issues here. Let me address the first one, which is, how are we approaching it, whether it's from a law enforcement angle, intelligence, or strategically. And I can do both of these through case examples. The FBI, I've talked to the FBI a number of times, and they ask for help, and I say no. Bad enough you're wasting my tax dollars, I'm not going to have you waste my time. And they go, well, what's that mean, Nick? And I said, well, here's what it means. It means that you publicly have said that you have one case in China every 12 hours. Okay, that's 2 cases a day times 365, 730 cases a year. And I know, because I've been in counterintelligence and done investigations, each one takes months to resolve, or could take months to resolve. So you are thousands of cases in arrears with absolutely no hope of ever gaining on this. Where is the national interest being served? Where is the deterrence? Is this going to slow down? No, it's not. What you're doing is what you're trained to do, and what you do in law enforcement, but it's not helping us as an overall effort. It's not abating in any way that onslaught that you're facing. It's like playing basketball, and every time you get the ball, giving it back to your opponents, who have double as many people on the court. We cannot win this way. We can't even keep our necks above water this way. Every agency is doing what they're supposed to do. No one is driving the train here. No one's coordinating and saying we need more of this, less of that. We need to take these actions. As I'll mention, Patton said once, always, always, always take the offensive. And it really is what we need to do. Whether it's in the counterintelligence realm, in the economic realm, in the intelligence field, we need to take an offensive here. That's the only way we're going to get through this, literally. Secondly, addressing your question of Africa.
It's more about how China, the world through different organizations steps in and tries to help lower income portions. We as the United States have. But then when you turn around and you see China end up in control of the asset,
Yeah,
I don't blame them for being smart. I blame us for being dumb and continuing to allow it.
I thought I made that clear, but no, you're absolutely right.
Okay.
And as we look globally and see China's hand globally, particularly through the Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, and I've spoken to a lot of political think tanks and political leaders or quasi leaders in Africa, and it's first off they come with one resounding thing: look, we never got anything from the U.S. Okay, so please don't tell us. That this is, we know China's not perfect by any means, and they bring our people there all the time to cadre schools and stuff like that. But, we know they're not perfect, but at least we're getting something out of it, right? Number one. Number two, China was brilliant in its execution of the Belt and Road Initiative. What it did was it had 500,000 people in the construction industry who were unemployed. After Beijing leveled off construction at 8,000 construction cranes in Beijing. They leveled off in building, and all these people are unemployed. So Xi Jinping puts out the Belt and Road Initiative. Hey, we'll give you a loan, and which was supposed to be employing locals, it's really not. It's moving Chinese millions abroad to do that. They effectively take control of the country. The country's indebted to them, and the money never leaves Beijing.
Payday lenders at best.
Yeah, it's absolutely brilliant.
Mr. Mazzar, I apologize for interrupting. I'm short on the clock. Mr. Mazzar, you've written extensively about gray zone competition. Does the evidence today support the conclusion that the U.S. Homeland itself has become a contested space? And if so, what are the key indicators of that condition?
100% yes, I think, and the indicators start with Chinese and Russian doctrine and concepts that strongly focus on other homelands as part of the peacetime and wartime competition. Goes to policy and initiatives in both countries that are doing a variety of things we've talked about to target the homeland, and then the behavior here. I think one of the critical things we've seen so far is in peacetime, for the most part, particularly on the Chinese side, they realize that there is a certain degree of background deterrence operating, because the Chinese realize that they can get into our critical infrastructure networks, but if they start doing real damage to American dams or electrical things, there's going to be significant retaliation. So absolutely, the homeland is a focus of rivals' strategies. There's already some degree of balance and deterrence operating, and I think the trick for us is to prioritize this. And one thing I would say is the key to me is the future, not just what we've seen so far. As AI empowers more actors and more non-state actors to come after the American homeland in a variety of ways, in 5 years and 10 years, and as we become more dependent on Internet of Things networks, digital networks, the security of homelands, this virtual and digital security, is going to be an absolute preoccupation of every country.
Thank you. I mean, China, it's very clear to me that China made the decision to transition from an aggressive economic competitor to an adversary, and I think that maybe we as Americans have not accepted that yet. With that, I yield 5 minutes, or a liberal 7 minutes, to Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Anyone for 8 minutes? No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so look, one question I have is what evidence do we have about North Korea engaging in any gray zone activities here in the U.S.? Dr. Martin?
That's not in my area of specialization.
Mr. Usher?
Yeah, I think I can address that, if that will come on. Look, I remember in 1994 standing on the deck of the Pong Su, which was a DPRK freighter that was seized off the coast of Australia, dealing drugs, okay? So they've been at this sort of thing for a long time. A lot of what they do is sort of borderline with criminal activity, because their intelligence services are expressly charged with raising hard currency on behalf of the regime.
Especially crypto.
Yeah, especially crypto nowadays, absolutely. And so there's reports just this week about how Iran received cryptocurrency with the assistance of the North Koreans. So crypto is an area that they're active in. Other criminal and smuggling activities, talk about counterfeiting with China. North Korea does the same thing with cigarettes, other brand name goods. So they're a little bit less full spectrum, perhaps, than China or even Russia. They're very kind of focused on raising hard currency, but they absolutely work the seams in our democracy, other democracies around the world, to raise crypto, steal money, steal intellectual property, or as we saw with the Sony case several years ago, operate ransom attacks when they feel threatened or they want money.
Is there an actor beyond kind of what we call the hard targets, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, that is increasingly kind of participating in these gray zone activities that we need to put on our radar as well?
I would say your more sophisticated terrorist organizations, such as Hezbollah, which does engage in cyber, does engage in mis and disinformation. ISIS in its heyday.
An example of what Hezbollah or any non-state actor has done recently?
So a lot of what Hezbollah has done is directed at Israel. Okay, but you could, in certain circumstances, look at what they're doing with drones in a surveillance sense.
When you're, sorry, just to drill down, are you saying that Hezbollah has participated in social media activities with regard to Israel?
Yes,
And
social media and online recruitment activities of Israeli citizens.
Of Israeli citizens?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Right. So that sort of capability, I think we have to anticipate, could be proliferated to other organizations or directed against us.
Got it. I interrupted. Were you going to say something else?
No.
Okay. Another question I have is with regard to, I had earlier talked about AHIs, the anomalous health incidents. Are you seeing that as somehow connected to a particular gray zone activity?
So in our research on the gray zone, I've not seen that as, in the open source at least, as a leading tactic or very specific behavioral evidence of rivals doing that. Obviously, there's the Havana syndrome issue and some specific things like that. But in terms of larger strategies aimed at homelands, not yet. But the role of AI here, I think, is just so important. As AI becomes more common as a medical tool in all kinds of ways, there are going to be ample opportunities for other actors to try to poison training, to get into chatbots, other kinds of things, to use that as a tool to achieve those kinds of health incidents. But so far, at least from the open source gray zone evidence I've seen, it's not a leading phenomenon.
Got it. Social media, I had, first talked about how it's very hard to tell anymore what is authentic and what's not in terms of social media feeds and responses to, anything that I do. I seem to be trolled like crazy by Russian bots. It seems like it. Dr. Martin, how do we combat that? What do we do with regard to this? I mean, not my particular issue, although I'm open to any suggestions, but I mean, just generally, what is the response here?
It's a very difficult question because you've got multiple actors who are inspired by Russia in addition to actors who are directed by Russia. But I think one of the things that we can do is look for examples like some of the ones that I mentioned earlier, where it is very clear that the direction is coming from specific Russian entities and then focus on them and taking down their servers. In terms of people who are inspired by Russia, there really isn't anything we can do.
Thank you. Mr. Eftimides.
And I have to change that name if I can ever go.
No. Please keep it. It's a little bit longer than mine, so it's all good. I like the idea of deterrence, something that I, talk a lot about on the China committee as well. With regard to gray zone activities, I think it's just a little bit harder to kind of wrap your arms around sometimes. But tell me an example of where the U.S. or some other country use deterrence to effectively prevent a gray zone activity from occurring?
I would have to think on it, honestly, sir. I don't, it doesn't come to mind. It's been very, very ingrained in our system that, we're defensive in our responses. So I haven't, there are certain things on military threats, if you will, that have pushed back on China, flying aircraft over the South China Sea, which, as freedom of navigation exercises, which we probably should have never gotten that situation in the first place, but that starts to escalate the cost for China. Trips to Taiwan escalate the cost for China.
I know about that.
Right, I know you do. So those are the types of things that can be that could potentially be effective, and upscaling that dramatically. Like even in the social media realm, that could be upscaled dramatically.
Got it. Thank you. Go ahead.
Ms. Tinney.
I don't know if this thing's on, but one last thing, maybe to either Mr. Usher or anyone, this is a little bit maybe peripheral to the gray zone idea, but we have so many constituents who call in who have been victims of overseas scams, and one of them had to do with Medicare home care, and it ended up being a Russian organized crime group. But are those groups necessarily separate from, say, the Russian government or the Chinese government? What's the situation with that? I mean, I find it hard to believe that these people have, how powerful the government is and authoritarian, that they really operate independently. Can you, because this is a real problem. I mean, we have people, they've gone down to the ATM and given their money away, and they do all this stuff but we find out, and even actually in the Medicare home care, it's millions and millions of dollars scammed using, it was in LA County, but still, it turned out it was not, it was Russian, but do we really believe that they're separate from the government? I mean, maybe you could answer that.
Can I tackle the Russian part of that? The evidence that we have is that the intelligence agencies hire hackers to do their work for them in Russia, and as long as whatever else they do doesn't harm Russian interests, they're happy to give them free rein. And so they are definitely working alongside people who are in organized crime quite happily, as long as those organized criminals work for Russian interests when Russia demands it of them.
So there could be coordination.
I don't think the state is directing their crimes. It's just allowing them to do it without punishing them.
And what can we do? What should we be doing on our side to minimize that? Because look, we obviously should have better controls and oversight and everything within our organizations, but we also allow this to get into our country. We're not looking at, but I just think more controls in place, and definitely looking into how do we find out who these groups are.
I go back to a couple of points I've made, which is that there are think tanks, there are investigative reporters who are really good at identifying the groups, which saves resources for U.S. government agencies, that they can use that information, maybe verify it, but not having to do all of it themselves. So cooperating across the private sector and the public service sector with government is something that makes sense. And then I go back to taking down the servers, because what we've learned is that sanctions don't stop the bad behavior. Sanctions have made the war in Ukraine more difficult and more expensive for Russia, but sanctions have not stopped the bad behavior.
Right. Well, with the Medicare home care issue in LA County, this went on for 3 years. So it's not like 3 or 4 years, 21 to 24. We didn't, there was, to say that it was something that happened occasionally. It was going on and on and on and on, taking advantage of our system. And really, most people were working from home, and we really lost the oversight. But again, it was one of these gangs that it turns out are organized crime, Russian crime group. The money's gone. We'll never get it back. But thank you. I yield.
If I may,
Go ahead.
I would just add that there's room for greater public-private partnership to increase our resiliency against ransomware attacks from whencever they come from, Russia, North Korea, other places. And there are some companies that are developing innovative technologies to help consumers and companies identify ransomware attacks and shut them down.
Right, but by the way, the media never covered this. They didn't do anything with it until we exposed it through a whistleblower recently. So I don't rely on the media being able to really be, maybe investigative reporters. I owned a newspaper. I don't see too many of them around that don't wear a team jersey. I'm just saying there's not very many of them. And why didn't they expose this it went on for years and years and years, I mean, during that period of time.
I don't know about the specific events, but there's an organization called OCCRP that does a really good job of tracking down what Russia does. Christo Grozev is another individual who does it. So it may not be in mainstream media, but there are specialized investigative reporting groups that are quite good at it.
Thank you, I appreciate that. That can be helpful.
Can I just comment for the China side of that?
Of course.
Because I've actually had this on the research that I've been doing over the last year. There are specific things we can correlate to the Chinese government is doing, or is in bed with, not the least of which is hackers for doing cybercrime. You can absolutely correlate that to China's Ministry of State Security and their public security apparatus. There are areas of corruption, a third level where it's corrupt officials, and then there are areas of not. And you can actually split down specific crimes and show, which ones they're actively involved with and are leveraging criminal organizations against the United States. And to me, I don't think we should take down servers. I think we should make them take down servers. Just
Agree. Thank you.
Our time's expired. I want to thank you all for being here today. Our democracy is contingent upon the American citizens knowing the truth when they go to the ballot box. And I again want to reiterate how effective our adversaries are at social media and how naive I think many Americans are to what they are doing on social media to our country. They've been very effective in Africa. They're not going to stop. We have to combat it. And with regard to the fraud and the senior fraud, this is occurring repeatedly across the United States. Unfortunately, it is usually in the realm of $5,000 or $10,000, and so it's not a big enough number that the FBI has an interest in it or the U.S. attorneys will address it. And it is done in such a manner that your local small town sheriff's departments and your small town police departments can't do anything about it. Just don't have the ability to do anything about it. I will tell you, I have talked with a lot of the people that want to do something about this in government agencies, and if we will task them, and that's a term those of you that have served in three-letter agencies would understand, that if we will task them with stopping this problem, this plague on the American citizens, and they have the ability to do it. And I'll end with that and say thank you for being here.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.